Hey everyone, you're listening to the Grace Auburn Church Podcast. My name is Lee, and it is a gift and a joy to be here with you today. And I am joined by one of my favorite groups of men today. All of our pastors are here for a round table conversation in wrapping up our series on the podcast, Who We Are, the DNA of Grace Auburn Church. And there were a lot of iterations of what I thought could be the final episode of that string of conversations, but we've pivoted this morning into a conversation that I think will land not only who we are as a church, but also land kind of a season of the podcast coming to an end as we've moved into 3325 Skyway Drive, stepping into more and more conversations for the rest of the fall on the podcast with local ministries that we're highlighting, introducing several new staff members, all of that sort of stuff I'm excited for. Matt, as we begin this morning, we've had some conversation about it as pastors this morning. I would love for you to frame our conversation as we conclude this portion of the podcast.
Yeah, I wanted us just to finish this conversation out with talking about the relationship between grace and gratitude. And how, as we experience God's grace personally, as we consider what He has given us in Jesus, that does translate into a deep sense of gratitude to God, but we also live out gratefulness before one another. And Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians a grace that's been given among churches. There was one congregation that was in the middle of severe affliction, and yet Paul would describe them having an abundance of joy in the midst of extreme poverty. And for this church, the grace that God had given them was a steadfast spirit that looked joyful even in the midst of great suffering. But one of the things that stands out to me is that Paul says they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God, they gave themselves to us. And I think that flows from a relationship where these followers of Christ understood the grace of God, and that it was beyond their circumstances. And even in the midst of hard circumstances, there was a joy and an abundance on their part. But I think it came down to practically, it's because they gave themselves to the Lord. Yeah. And because having given themselves to the Lord, because of grace that God had given them, they were then free to give themselves to one another. And so for our conversation today, I'd love to think about how has the grace of God for you men, how has that impacted not only your relationship, obviously, with God, but as you relate to other people, how do grace and gratitude, what's the connection in your life?
Well, I'll go ahead and start.
Yeah.
As I was thinking about this, there were several instances that I thought of like what God has done as being primarily with college students, what God has done in their lives. And the last campus that we got together, I got to share a little bit of like with them at 720 East Glen saying, hey, in that corner, I remember hearing the story of God saving one of you in this room. In that corner, I remember God redeeming and healing. So I was thinking about a lot of those stories, but I think what would be, what I want to share is just kind of our story of like when we first came to Grace Auburn, me and my wife, Sarah, we came in, I'm getting a little emotional thinking about, man, just the way God has been so good to us. We came in the doors hurting and empty in a lot of ways. And we were not vocationally in ministry. We were taking a season out of it and probably not anticipating coming back in. But the grace of God to lead us through those doors, to connect. At that time, it was just Lee and Matt. You guys were the only pastors on staff. And the way y'all extended grace and graciousness towards us ministered to us in a way that I don't think I did not understand I needed. And God truly, in so many ways, has restored my heart through that grace to love Him more, to love my wife better, to love my kids in a different way, and to serve His people in a new level of gratitude. Honestly, that I was unaware I needed until experiencing it. And so, as I thought about this new season of ministry and how grace and gratitude are just so hand in hand. I wanted to share stories of what God did in college students' lives, and there are many of them to share, but man, I can't get past what God has done in my life and in my wife's life and her love for the Lord and the way she loves and serves our family. And I'm just so grateful for God bringing us through those doors 7 years ago to bring us on staff in November of 2020, to bring me on staff as a pastor and her on staff and Grace Kids, and to be surrounded by each of you and your wives and your families. It's been such a gift. And so thank y'all. And I'm really looking forward to this next season of ministry together as we shift gears and move forward.
That's good.
Caleb, I love what you said there, because I think if all of us had that moment, I could articulate the same thing. Like, to be here with you guys is such a gift, and to be a part of this staff team is such a gift. To be around this table right now is such a gift, and I wish I had better words, but I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. But that is a word often I use with people. And I share that sentiment with you of like, if it weren't for the grace of God, with God, who could stand?
Yeah.
But also, if it weren't for the grace in which we stand, who could be here?
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah, that's right.
So I just appreciate you sharing that.
I think about this table, and you talk about when you came in, it being Matt and I, and we've had the privilege to sit together at this table almost from the very beginning. And there have been men sit at this table that are no longer with us. There have been men sit in our meetings. Fuller right now is a good example of someone who, when I say a round table of pastors here, we will still be here in January, but Fuller will not be. We're excited to send him and launch him into ministry and leads, serving alongside your brother, and we're so excited for that, for him to be able to step into that role. But for me, when I think about gratitude, the thing I keep coming back to, and I think we could all probably, when one of us says something, we're probably going to be like, oh, me too, right? Like over and over and over again.
Like, even as you're setting this up, I'm like, I should. Wait, let me say that.
Wait, no. And I love my wife. Me too. I am incredibly grateful for friendships at this church. I think Lacey and I, we've always had friends in our lives, but I think we're in such a rich place with friendships now, largely because of the grace of God and the people of this church. And it's not just for me and having you men and other men in our body who are dear, dear brothers and friends, but I see it for my wife too. Yeah. And I think we could probably all look back on seasons of ministry where, man, I was thriving and she was not. She was alone. She was on an island. She was hurting. But that has not been the case here. And the Lord has done such a good work for both of us in bringing friendships into our lives. And I am incredibly grateful for the grace of God that has been given to us in the way that it has. I have recently just done a ton of reading on friendship, and it is such an overlooked, maybe in some ways the same way gratitude is. It's such an overlooked part of the Scriptures that I think is incredibly important, and I think something that we don't talk about enough. Like, what does a true godly friendship look like? What does it cost? How has the Lord wired men to lean on one another differently than their wives? In the same way, how has the Lord wired women to need and count on one another differently than their husbands? And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. And I'm incredibly grateful not only to you men, but to my brothers. And I'm grateful for the ladies who have loved my wife really well over the course of our time here. It really has been a real sweet gift.
Yeah, so Amy and I think we've been here right at about 4 years, and I echo exactly what y'all are saying as y'all are talking. I'm sitting here, because what you just said, Lee, is something that I could say also just about my wife. And, and starting this conversation with you guys, my initial thought was to tell you that we were in the Meadows community group, and the reason why we're here is Sarah Meadows chili.
Yes.
Right. Because it is so good. Which then kind of segues into one of our favorite parts about being here. our community groups.
Yeah.
And the vulnerability that's there, the care, the connection that we are able to have with each other, the conversations, the time around the Word, the time in worship. John Hunt brings his guitar and he'll lead us a couple songs, and there is this genuine care that Amy and I and our girls have been able to be a part of here. And I've told this story. I tell this story just about every single time that we are able to sit with the family to talk through the family commitment and membership about our journey here and how we were invited so many times to come to church here, and we finally said, okay, we'll go. And we attend the service, and we get back out in the car, and Amy looks at me, and she says, well, and I said, well, what? And she said, what did you think? And I said, well, what did you think? And I just get quiet, and she says, what I love about Grace Auburn is, and this is after our first time visiting, was the authenticity of the Word being the focus. And I just looked at her, I was like, exactly. And we both kind of just started tearing up a little bit just because we felt like we had been on this journey of finding somewhere that we can grow with other believers that are headed in the same direction. And it's living out gospel-centered lives. And so, yeah, when I think about our community group and who we're involved with and the people that we get to do life with, you guys around this table, is I'm reminded of Galatians chapter 6, where we're told, bear one another's burdens. And I've seen that lived out really since it feels like our first time walking in the doors, specifically with you guys around the pastor's table and the honesty and vulnerability that we see there with just sharing parts of our lives and asking for prayer and really seeking the Lord together. And that's not the case everywhere. And so when I think about gratitude and grace, that's where my heart is driven to, just the thought of caring for each other, obviously caring for our families well, caring for each other, and then caring for the people that God has entrusted us to walk with daily.
Yeah.
Yeah. I meant to share a Bible verse too.
Yeah.
I forgot.
You still have time. Get it out. Quick.
It's not over.
That's good.
I think I'm trying to remember my first. Lacey and I were still working at Cornerstone. I know we were there at Ross House. I'm trying to remember our first experience at Trinity Lutheran, meeting Jack and Kelly. We probably met Jack and Kelly at Ross House at some point. A very similar experience in a very tiny space, right? Like y'all's experience was at 720. You guys came in at 720. Y'all came in at Trinity Lutheran. One of the things I love and I'm incredibly grateful for, and I hope this is the experience that people have here at Skyway Drive, right, is that in so many ways we've intentionally set up spaces, including the sanctuary, that is meant to foster connection. Where people can actually rub shoulders, hear one another singing, see one another singing. I don't know how many thousands of dollars we've spent cutting windows into that sanctuary to bring in natural light to where we can actually see one another, know one another, talk with one another, whether it's before or during a greeting one another as Christ has welcomed you, welcoming one another as Christ has welcomed you.
I appreciate that you just stumbled over that as you were trying to make fun of me.
Yeah.
Caleb says multiple different versions of that verse, multiple different translations of it that are not real translations.
Usually the NLT. It's the NLT.
It's the Caleb's whatever. Okay, all right. I don't know. I just think that from the very beginning, this church has been set up. You use the word authentic, right? That if we begin with the Word of God, and we talked about this in the last episode on expository preaching, our hope, genuinely. And we don't know how many people are going to show up here for our first public gathering on Sunday, open to the public. We gathered this past Sunday with our members, which I think we could all talk about how grateful we were for that moment.
Yeah.
I love that people can meet people, and it's not just these people flowing in, flowing out. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about how long is it going to take to empty this parking lot, but the reality is we don't want it to empty too quick.
Yeah.
It will create a certain level of headaches, and there may be members of our parking team who are like, no, we want it to empty fast. But our role as pastors is going to be, no, it really is okay if it takes a little too long. The idea of lingering and connecting and being with one another, I'm grateful for. It's been really, really, really good.
Yeah, that makes me think about, just as you're all talking, and I'm thinking about kind of this common thread and thinking back through the series that you've done, on our DNA and just who we are as a church. I'm really just overcome with gratefulness at the grace of the Lord and how He uses the local church. I think, especially in seasons like this, when it's new and big and exciting, people have areas of ministry that they want to gravitate to. Oh, the church is here to do this. The church is here to do that. And it is. It's all of those things, and it's there to knit people together, to create relationship like what you've talked about. I mean, we're a tiny shadow of an example of what heaven, being in the presence of God, will be like one day. And every time we come together, we get to experience that in part here and now. And so, each one of us has stories of how the Lord has used His local church to change our lives, to change our trajectory, to give us hope, to encourage us. And I'm just so grateful that He does that He cares about each one of His children in such a way that He gives us this opportunity in this place to do life together, to worship Him together, to be connected, regardless of the size of your church, regardless of how new or old things are. It is a gift that we get to come together, unified, mysteriously, through Christ within us all. And I think that everything that you've all said is totally true, and for me, that's just encompassed in being grateful of the grace of God in the local church.
I was thinking Sunday before our members gathering, just thinking back on before we even started the church, before we planted it, when it was just a website that was unpublished, and I remember some pretty clear moments where after our first gathering at Ross House, just standing in the hallway and really, you just think back over your life, and one of the most important things about life is who it is with, and I'm so grateful for the friendships that shaped me long before that moment, or then thinking about Trinity Lutheran and how in that beautiful building, I rediscovered stained glass and the simplicity of worship and a new appreciation for liturgy and the courage to pray beyond our own zip code, and how closely connected my own sanctification was to taking communion and leading communion every week, and getting to do that moment, and then the overwhelming sense of, is this even going to work at 720 East Glen? And standing with a group of our members, there might have been 40 or 50 of us in a pre-renovated space where the budget was overwhelming, and I was thinking, is this even going to work? And then COVID hits, and
that's actually my favorite memory. It's COVID
and that
live streaming with you.
And
I
that,
changed
oh my goodness, that lobby was a sanctifying space. But I did have a moment a couple weeks ago where I just, at 720 East Glen, things were being packed, and we were in between spaces, and I just took a moment to sit in that space while we still had chairs in there. And I just remember thanking God. No one was there. It was just a moment, but I began to think back to everything that I could remember happening in that room, and so grateful. And then being able to pray with my daughters in that space again, and then standing in Skyway on Sunday with our members to dedicate the space. I'm just so incredibly grateful for the journey thus far.
I read a recent book on friendship, kind of going back to it, but it's the same idea of what you just said, kind of as we conclude this conversation. And I do want you to land our conversation here in just a moment, and I want anybody else to jump in with any final thoughts you may have or any final memories you may have. But if you think about every good moment in your life, it's always people that you remember. It's always the friendships. It's always the gathering of the individuals or the family or whomever it is. It's never the thing itself. The memory is always of people. It's always with the people. And I as well, I'm so incredibly grateful for the people that the Lord has called us to love and shepherd and care for. Yeah.
So I'll conclude with what Paul says to the church at Corinth. He says, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich." And that is true not only eternally with him, but we get a foretaste of that on earth through a deep connection through the family of God, and through fellowship with other followers of Christ. And in that richness, if we can live in that place of gratitude, and I know we all carry burdens and pains and battle scars, but if we can live in a place of gratitude at work and at home and in society, we're better off for it. And so I just want to hold fast to that grace, that I would be a grateful person.
On behalf of the Grace Auburn Church family, thank you for listening to the Grace Auburn Church podcast. If you'd like more information about partnering with us and our mission or ways that you can get connected, please go to our website, graceauburn.church.